One shots. DPS. Sustain. Mobility. Power spike. I present to you the Stridebreaker, a perfect all-rounder. Hi everyone, I'm the Clone, and in today's video I will be going over the Stridebreaker build. The Stridebreaker build has probably become the most popular build among High Elo Shaco players. It's a build that's not only really good and fun to play with, but also has really high outplay potential. Get outplayed. No, but seriously, I had so much fun with this build for the video. I mean, look at what I did to this Victor. I killed him before he even got to lane. He was playing mid lane, and he was not even inting. And the build is not only good at one-shotting. Because of the Stridebreaker, it's also really good at dodging skill shots with a dash, that by the way got its range increased last patch. And the item is also really useful when you have to chase someone, not that guy, because it has a really decent range on his dash. You don't always have to use your Q to close the gap, and you can keep your E for the execute. The item is also really useful when the enemy AD carry is playing with something like the Galeforce, or they have a dash or blink ability like Ezreal, because you can close the gap, and on top of that you can also slow them. But how could I talk about the Stridebreaker without touching on a hardbound axe first? This item looks like a hoe. Besides that, it's actually really good. It's kind of a combination between the old Phage and the new Quiver. It gives damage and attack speed, which is what you need most in the early game. But on top of that, its passive is what makes the item so neat, especially since it's just as expensive as the Iron Whip, and for the early game, I would actually much rather build this item before the Ass Whip, especially because I feel like you can farm the jungle faster, and when it comes to fighting enemies, because in the early game you won't be able to one-shot anyone really, the movement speed that you get from this item in combination with Shaco's E passive, it's what really makes you stick onto your targets, and that especially when combined with a nice attack speed that you get if you go for the Berserker's Greaves as your boots choice, which you pretty much always should, simply because of how good their value is. You can really dominate the early game with your crazy DPS, albeit you can also choose to go for the Iron Whip, which, by the way, got its cost reduced from 1200 to 1100, while getting its cooldown increased from 15 seconds to 20 seconds, which in a way it's a buff, mostly because you weren't going to use the whips active more than once in a fight anyways, since the 15 seconds cooldown was really high to begin with. In conclusion, you should really only go for the whip if you either like the AD it provides, or if you struggle with basic tasks and have a tendency to die to the chickens. That was a joke, by the way, please don't lock me behind bars. Unless you do really have a tendency to die to the chickens, but then you should probably just go ahead and watch one of my guides to get better at Shaco. If you want to do so, you can just click the card to go to my guides playlist. Moving on, let's talk about the reason this video exists in the first place, the Stridebreaker itself. This item has spiked in popularity after the Galeforce and Lethality items got nerfed. And for good reason. It has a similar passive to the Galeforce, where you can dash towards an enemy, damaging and slowing them, and most importantly, it shares some aspects with the old Trinity Force, an item that back in season 8, 9 and 10, after you had built the old Dustblade, was the crowning jewel of Shaco's power. It gave attack speed, some health, mana, movement speed, and most importantly, the Spellblade passive. A passive that to this day, when upgraded, it still gives more damage than the Dustblade's passive, and that's every time you proc it with an ability. This build is the closest you can get to season 10 Shaco, and season 10 Shaco, besides the memes, was not that weak. People still made it to Challenger with that exact build, and as I already said, if you liked season 8, 9 and 10 Shaco, this build is for you. The only difference being, this build can be much stronger. I present to you the Stridebreaker build, a homage to old Shaco. The Stridebreaker got changed last patch, but not necessarily for the worse, no. It got its slow nerf and its damage lowered from 100% to 75%, but it got its range increased by 100. And on Shaco, that's really important. It's important on Shaco because of one reason. Just like you can dash from stealth using the Galeforce and still get the backstep crit damage, you can do the same with a Stridebreaker. Why can you do that? If on Shaco you lose the stealth from your Q, you cannot crit anymore, even if you get a backstep, right? Well, not exactly. And this is really important. If your stealth is about to expire, and by using the Stridebreaker or any item that makes you dash towards an enemy, as long as you get to them and land the backstab in time before your stealth would have expired, you can still land the crit. The game still allows you to do so. So if you're not in range to land the backstab in time, just use the Stridebreaker. close the gap, even slow them with its active, and then land the backstab. You'll do the full crit damage. And that's just another reason why this item is so good. And because of its stats and passives combined with the active, the Stridebreaker is the modern version of the Triforce that Shaco used to build every game back in Season 10. Also, fun fact about the Stridebreaker, the item is a combination between the Trinity Force and the Galeforce. It's even in the name. Maybe, I'm just kinda guessing, but it'd be pretty cool if it were to actually be the case. Moving on, besides the movement speed passive that I've already talked about, its second passive, its Mythic passive to be more exact, is the same as the one on the Galeforce, meaning that for each legendary item that you get, you gain 3% bonus movement speed. It's not something too insane, but movement speed is truly underrated, and in reality at full build with 4 legendary items, the 12% bonus movement speed can really be useful, especially when you want to backstab a highly mobile carry in the late game or when running / chasing someone. But now that I've talked about the Stridebreaker is where the real fun begins. Let's talk about the entire build, how it works, why it works, and the playstyle itself that works for the build. Also, if you guys enjoy my content, please like this video and subscribe if you have not done yet so, as it takes me a really long time to make this kind of videos, and by liking and subbing, you're really helping me a lot when it comes to making more videos like this one. Let's get back to the build. When it comes to the entire build, you have two main choices. One, you either go for the classic crit Shaco, or after the Stridebreaker you go for the Essence Reaver and then into full crit, or two, after the Stridebreaker you go for the Sanguine Blade. Now the second build is extremely focused on power spiking in the early game. The Sanguine Blade is really good for when farming the jungle as fast as possible while keeping yourself at full HP, and it can also fight pretty much anything you throw at it. But it has a problem. Two problems to be more exact. The first problem being at the core of Shaco's whole kit. You need burst damage, and while the Sanguine Blade can be really good, most of the times you want the burst damage that you get from the Sheen's passive and the Essence Reaver. And that's because with Shaco, you'll find yourself much more often in situations where you must execute the enemy as fast as possible before they either heal, shield, dash, or flash away. And that's why I find the Sanguine Blade to be not the best choice for your second item. Although if you really only want to power spike in the early game, keep in mind that you can also go for the Sanguine Blade as your second item. Nonetheless, going back, the other reason why you don't really want the Sanguine Blade as your second item is, fun enough, crit. You want as much as possible and you want it as fast as possible. And that's because this build at the end of the day is just a crit build. The only difference being really just a Mythic item and the playstyle. And that's the thing. That's why the Essence Reaver is the best option for your second item. In fact, most people say that the Essence Reaver is the best item on Shaco period. And they're right, it is, because it has such a high gold efficiency and it perfectly synergizes with Shaco's Q. But not only, it also gives you more mana back than you used when you proc the Spell Blade passive, meaning that you could just never run out of mana the second you get the item. Also, the nerfs that were supposed to arrive this patch got cancelled if I'm not mistaken, meaning that the Essence Reaver will not get its AD nerf from 55 to 45. So there's no point in even trying to look for a replacement. Now that you know why you want to get the Essence Reaver as your second item, there's one more point that I want to make regarding the Essence Reaver. There are certain people that argue how due to its efficiency, it's even worth buying it as your first item. Yet, I somewhat disagree with that. And that's simply because of how the whole meta revolves itself around Mythic items being the first type of items that you want to get. The Stridebreaker's got 2 passives and 1 active on top of a bunch of stats. And as I already mentioned, since its dash got buffed, it's really easy to gank with it. And ganking in the earlier parts of the game is what really wins you the game. That and securing the objectives. Moving on when it comes to what type of shoes you want to go for, since according to the new lore Shaco's just a tiny marionette, it's safe to assume that just like anything that's undersized, it's got anger management issues, and that's why for your boots you want to go for the Berserker's Greaves. Why? Well, according to Norse mythology, to go berserk is to black out in anger and attack anything that gets in your way, aka a perfect match. Oh, by the way, since the Shaco guide I did, where I showed you a few 1 billion IQ tips, a few of you requested me in the comments that for the next time I share any tips, I should step up my game and share 1 trillion IQ tips. But you guys know me, with the big brain that I've got, I'm going to give you a 1 Googleplex IQ tip. And to put that into perspective, the mass of all books required to write a Googleplex would be vastly greater than the mass of the observable universe by a factor of roughly 7 multiplied by 10 at the power of 39. Or something, I don't really know. I'm just reading all of this from Wikipedia, and to be honest, anyone can write anything on Wikipedia. Oh. Anyways, the 1 Googleplex IQ tip is, and always remember this, dying is gay. Now you're guaranteed to never feed again. You're welcome. Moving on with our lives, after the Stridebreaker, Essence River and Berserker's Greaves, you kinda have two choices. You either go for the Navori Quick Blades or the Collector. Now the Navori are quite great, for reasons I'll get to in a few moments, but the Collector, it actually got pretty nerfed since I last time spoke about it, and to be honest, this item is still really overrated. I mean, the longer the game goes on, the worse the item becomes, as everyone's armor increases with level. And the only thing the Collector is good at is one-shotting super squishy enemies. And an AD carry at level 18, it's almost got 100 armor, and by this point the Collector's lethality becomes useless. Now let's talk about the Navori Quick Blades and why I like this item so much. It's because of the item's passive. It's really useful. And it's not just about the fact that when you're in a fight, after you jump in with Q, you can get that Q cooldown lowered as fast as possible, so you can re-engage and possibly go for a double, triple, quadra and even pentakill. It's about how fast you can roam, and reset your boxes as well. In later parts of the game you'll be able to delete jungle camps, and the faster you can queue in between them, the faster your clear will be, and the faster you'll be ready for the next team fight. And on top of it, if you use your Q for a wall jump towards the jungle camp, 3 to 4 seconds later, if an enemy appears, instead of having to wait for your Q cooldown, you can just instantly re-engage them. And that's why the Navori Quick Blades are so good, because you can Q much more often than before, and the item also reduces the cooldown of your boxes and E, so all the better. Damn, would you guys look at that? While I was sitting here explaining the build, Zed and his pet started thinking that they're important. Just give me 1 second. I'm sorry dog, I don't speak anime. Okay, moving on. Oh my god, what now? Okay, just give me 1 more second. There you go, back to the build. And now for the 5th and 6th item, you guys know that I like to give you a lot of options and let you change the build that you're liking. I personally like to go for even more damage for my 5th item, as something like the Infinity Edge will get you to 60% crit, and its passive will then provide you with a bonus of 35% more crit damage. Or eventually, if you want more utility, you can either go for the Mortal Reminder or the Lord Dominic's. The Mortal Reminder is a super nice item simply because of its passive, the Grievous Wounds, especially if the enemy team has a lot of heals, but not only. The item also provides you with damage, attack speed and movement speed, that when combined with the movement speed that you get from the Stridebreaker's passives will turn you into a super fast assassin and provide you with a lot of roaming potential. And the Lord Dominic's is good because of its percentage armor penetration, and the passive which many people just brush over, but its passive increases your damage against enemies that have more health than you, and that can be super neat, especially against enemies that have a ton of HP but not that much armor, like a bruiser or a healthier mage. By the way, if you really feel like the enemy team has a bunch of tanky champions, feel free to use Cut Down, as it can really be useful, and even more so when combined with the Lord Dominic's. And lastly, for a 6th item, you can either go for a combination of the 3 items that I've already talked about, or you can go for something with more utility. Now as you're approaching the late game, if the enemy team feels like they're getting tankier and tankier, you can go for the Blade of the Ruin King. Its passive is really useful, and not only, after attacking 3 times you get its super neat movement speed that you can use to get away after one-shotting your target. You're really sticky and fast with this build. Or you can go for the Ravenous Hydra. The Ravenous Hydra is especially useful when dueling someone and when you really need to split push as fast as possible while remaining healthy. Now for the last 2 choices, you have either the Maw of Malmortius, which by the way got super buffed as it got its cost lowered by 300, and that's a ton. I mean, the item just became insanely cost efficient. And if the enemy team has a really strong AP comp, and especially if they're full AP, this item is a must have, no matter what build you're going for. Or if the enemy team has a really strong AD comp, you can go for the Death Dance. Its passive is really good, and it helps you last just a little longer in order for you to be able to heal and survive, or to assassinate your target. And because of the HP that you get from the Stridebreaker, when combined with the Death Dance's passive, you should be able to easily last for longer. That's what she said. And this is the final build, guys. Please do let me know in the comments down below what you think about it, and if you already tried a variation of it before, well, in that case do let me know how it went and whether or not you like the build. For once, as my keystone, I still prefer to take Hail of Blades with Cheap Shot to dominate the early game. Then I go for Eyeball Collection, as the other 2 choices seem pretty useless, and lastly for the Domination 3 I take Relentless Hunter. That's because as a jungler you really need the movement speed in order to roam as much as you can, especially in the mid lane. Now for the secondary 3 I always go for Precision, as I prefer damage and scaling. As I already mentioned earlier, if you go for the Lord Dominics as the enemy team feels super tanky, just go for Cut Down for the synergy. Or if you like invading a lot and feel cheeky like me, go for Cap the Grease. It's probably the most consistent rune in this tree, and it's especially good because it helps you avoid the moment when the enemy escapes with 5 HP in the early game. And for my last choice, I like to go for either Elemental Accuracy, as it's especially good when you want DPS and to just clear the jungle much faster. It gives 18% attack speed when fully stacked, and usually you'll get it stacked by minute 15. Or if you feel like you need more sustain, Legend Bloodline is always a solid second choice. It's harder to stack if I'm not mistaken, but the 9% lifesteal you get from it, it's 100% worth. Alright, when it comes to the next build video, let me know in the comments down below what you want me to do next. I'm open for anything, even an AP build. I was actually thinking about doing either Eclipse for the AD build or Liandry's for the AP build. Just comment Eclipse or Liandry's, I'll check whichever item build was requested more and then do the next video on it. Oh, by the way, I will be live this Saturday, so join the stream. I will be playing with both Eclipse and Liandry's there. Heck, I might even do build requests like back when I first started streaming. Anyways, the live will be over at twitch.tv/MikeTheClone and here on YouTube. But until then, thank you so much for watching. If you like my content and want to support me, please do like this video and subscribe if you have not done yet so. And as always, until next time, don't trip and break your neck, guys. Stay safe. Oh, you're still here. Well, in that case, let me give you some life advice. Drink water, lots of it. Nah, I'm just kidding, guys. This is not an advice. It's a fucking threat! Drink your goddamn water, I said.